For better or for worse, this may be a day where we have to double dip on the Dylan Larkin conversation. There are a number of things that I think we should talk about, so stay tuned to this channel as the day goes on. But in this video, I wanted to talk about Dylan Larkin of the Detroit Red Wings, as well as Mathew Barzal of the New York Islanders, and ask whether or not one or the other is a better fit for the Montreal Canadiens. Now, as we have noted, Dylan Larkin is on the trade block. The guy wants out. There is a debate to be had as to whether or not Larkin would actually accept a trade to a Canadian team like the Montreal Canadiens, but with recent reports that Larkin has supposedly expanded his trade list a little bit due to Steve Yzerman saying, hey, it's going to be impossible to trade you for fair value when you give us 3 teams. Maybe there's an opportunity that Larkin is willing to go to Canada. We've heard the contrary, but who really knows? And then you also have Mathew Barzal out of the New York Islanders organization, a guy that reportedly does not actually want to leave New York, but a guy who still is being talked about in trade discourse and whose name has entered the market too. He had 72 points last year in 81 games played. He was famous for defeating Connor McDavid in the fastest skater competition a few years ago at the All-Star game. And Barzal is a guy that is technically younger than Dylan Larkin, also making a similar dollar amount for a similar amount of time. With that said, the reason we are diving into this is because of this post made on the R Hockey subreddit. It's an excerpt of NHL Network's latest broadcast, coming to you live from the Stanley Cup Finals, where Dylan Larkin is mentioned as potentially not being the only big-name center on the rumor mill. David Pagnotta talks about how Mathew Barzal is also on the block. Now, this is a video segment. We'll leave it in the description below if you want to go out there and watch Pagnotta's take. You want to hear what the NHL Network folks say about Barzal, but pretty much all you gotta learn is the fact that Barzal's future in New York doesn't seem to be all too guaranteed. If the Isles want to go down this entire retool path and build around Matthew Schaefer, Barzal is a very, very notable piece that can fetch them some value. They're already letting Anders Lee go to free agency. They already traded away Noah Dobson. Barzal could be next. Let's take a look at this post on the RHAB sub by V. Jux. Thoughts on Barzal as Montreal's second-line center. Top comment says, honestly, the only problem I have with Barzal is that he's not good at faceoffs. But other than that, what a 2C he would be with Demidov on his wing. He's always been hampered by playing on an offensively weak team and still produces a lot. Barzal is fast, and he is a possession monster, so that fits right into the Montreal Canadiens and their playstyle. Apparently, his dad is a big Habs fan, and he speaks French too. So, that's a nice bonus. Now, yeah, actually, that doesn't surprise me if Mathew Barzal was actually a French immersion kid when he was in Coquitlam, BC, here in Canada. So, obviously, if Barzal has that French connection, that does open the door to a more seamless transition to an organization like the Montreal Canadiens. Top reply says, I really do like Barzal. I think he'd be more unlocked in the Canadian system, and he would fit right in. I just don't see why they do it unless he is asking out. You can't always get the most ideal fit, and he checks a lot of boxes anyways. It depends on who else is available, but if he is a realistic acquisition, I'd do it in a heartbeat. Now, there are other folks that are saying the contrary. He is another right-handed center with recurring injury history, bad on faceoff dots. I'd sign him as a UFA, but I wouldn't trade the farm for him personally. Now, the handedness at center thing actually is a pretty reasonable concern when you talk about variation in your lineup and being able to have multiple options on multiple sides. Nick Suzuki's right, Kirby Dach is right, Jake Evans is also right. Alex Newhook is left, but then again, that guy doesn't really play too much center nowadays. Mathew Barzal also happens to be a right-handed guy like those other names, so I do think it is fair to acknowledge that maybe getting too many right-handed centers per se isn't the best idea around. But for me personally, if I had the choice to have Mathew Barzal feeding Ivan Demidov for the next few years, I'd say that's a pretty good way to do your business. And when you think about just the speed, the rover-style offense that Barzal has, the fact that he has been a multi-time 80-point scorer in his career, and that he could potentially be on the move here, Montreal should be in and around this player. 2031 is the contract expiration date. $9.15 million per is the dollar amount. We are starting to see this become very normalized for guys that can be top six centers. And Barzal, he's making less money than Noah Dobson at this point. So I do think there is a pretty reasonable conversation to have about that number. Let's shift gears, though, and switch to the other center at hand. We already spoke about Barzal. Let's dive into whether or not a guy like Dylan Larkin could be Montreal's trade target. You see, earlier this week, we had The Athletic go out there with this piece: the NHL teams that need Dylan Larkin the most, and what they can trade to the Red Wings. This article was posted, and the Montreal Canadiens segment is also linked over here. Here's how Larkin would fit with the Canadiens' system. He would slot in exceptionally well behind Nick Suzuki, giving the Canadiens a powerful duo of two-way centers atop its lineup. Both players can take on tough competition and still produce at a high level, making Montreal a nightmare to match up against. And Larkin would add a left shot complement to the right-handed Suzuki. The Canadiens already went to the Eastern Conference Finals this season, and while we expect a resurgent season from the Florida Panthers in 2026, adding a high-octane, well-rounded player like Larkin would make Montreal quite formidable in the Atlantic Division. Here's what the Habs can offer. According to The Athletic, outside of being a division rival, the Canadiens would be one of the most appealing potential trade partners because of their collection of future assets. Whether it's young center and Michael Hage, an exciting winger prospect in Alexander Zhuravsky, D-man David Reinbacher and Adam Engstrom, or first-round picks, the Canadiens could put together a very compelling package that will be tough for other teams to match. Now, that's not surprising, hearing any of that be written about here. The Montreal Canadiens got a lot of young prospects, and if the Detroit Red Wings are going to be trading away Dylan Larkin, it's kind of obvious they're not going to be all too competitive anytime soon. That is, unless they're able to pry away that Minnesota trade package of, let's say, a Yurov, a Wallstead, plus some other prospects and picks or what have you. There is a chance that Detroit burns themselves with this Dylan Larkin trade. As long as they get enough assets to help him out in the future, though, that's all that matters here. And the Montreal Canadiens could certainly help them out with the future talk. It's just a question as to whether or not Detroit would be willing to settle for a trade that makes their NHL team worse on paper. Who knows? If Montreal is willing to give up, let's say, a Kapanen or a Doc or something, maybe that helps out Detroit in the now, but obviously you're not going to be going anywhere with Kirby Dach as your number one center. Either way, I'd say that if the Detroit Red Wings are a little more focused on win-now pieces, it makes it more difficult for a Dylan Larkin trade to work. If the New York Islanders, on the other hand, are more interested in prospects, then maybe Mathew Barzal makes more sense for Kent Hughes and his team to go after this season. With that in mind, you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section. How do you feel about Dylan Larkin and or Mathew Barzal as potential Montreal Canadiens trade acquisitions? One or the other? Which one fits more in your mind? Do you think both is a possibility? Okay, that's not going to happen. The Montreal Canadiens are not going to be able to run Suzuki, Barzal, and Larkin on the same team. That's just not going to happen, unfortunately. But the Montreal Canadiens subreddit, they're popping off talking about this stuff, so I wanted to make a video about it as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about these center acquisitions for Montreal? I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.